Imagine waking up on a peaceful Saturday morning, only to have your world shattered by the sound of metal crushing through wood. A car slammed into my fence. But the real wreck wasn't just in my yard, it was in the lies that followed. The driver, the son of the neighborhood's self-appointed HOA Queen Karen, and instead of owning up, he told the cops I should pay for the damage. In that moment, I wasn't just fighting for my fence. I was fighting for my dignity, for the truth, and for the right to stand on my own land without being silenced. I rushed out, heart pounding, and there it was. My fence, the one I built with my own hands, the one that framed my home and gave me a sense of safety, was no longer standing. In its place, chaos. A car sat there, nose deep into the wreckage, wood scattered like matchsticks across the lawn. And behind the wheel, the son of the one woman in this neighborhood who believed the whole street was her kingdom, Karen, the HOA president who carried clipboards like weapons, who knocked on doors with fines instead of greetings, who smiled only when she was scolding. Her son, red-eyed, smelling of last night, sat frozen behind the wheel like a boy caught with his hand in someone else's purse. But the real story, the real crash didn't happen when his bumper tore through my fence. It happened when the lies started spilling out of his mouth. He stumbled out of the car, brushing dust off his clothes like the wreck wasn't sitting right there in the yard. "Man," he said, looking around like he owned the place, "your fence was too close to the road. You're gonna have to pay for this." I stood there, stunned. My fence? The one he just crashed into? My property, the one I paid taxes for, the one the city measured and approved? The gall in his voice burned hotter than the coffee I hadn't even sipped yet. Before I could even respond, here came Karen herself, storming down the street in her robe, hair in rollers, face tight as barbed wire. "What happened here?" She barked, though you could tell she already knew. Her son, her pride and joy, stood behind her, eyes darting. "He hit my fence," I said, keeping my voice steady. But Karen's lips curled into that smile she wore when she thought she could spin the world her way. "Well," she said, "your fence shouldn't have been so close to the curb. If anything, this is your fault. You'll need to get it fixed so it's up to community standards." Her words carried that tone I heard 100 times before, the kind that wasn't just about a fence, but about who had the right to claim space in this neighborhood. The kind that said, "You may live here, but you don't belong here." I took a breath. I've lived long enough to know what silence costs. "No," I told her, "your son drove into my yard. My fence is exactly where it's supposed to be. He's responsible." She didn't like that. Her eyes narrowed. "Don't get smart. I run this HOA and I know what's right." It wasn't long before the flashing red and blue lights painted the street. Neighbors peeked through curtains. Some came out onto porches, whispering like they were watching a play unfold. The cops stepped out, notepads in hand, and Karen's son straightened up like he'd just been cast in a starring role. "This man's fence was built wrong," he told them before they even asked. "It was sticking out too far." I tried to avoid it, but he trailed off, shaking his head, pretending like he was the victim of some ambush by wood and nails. And here's the part that cuts deep. I could see the officers glance at me, then at him, then back at Karen standing there like a queen defending her heir. I knew that look. I've seen it in boardrooms, in classrooms, even in grocery aisles. That pause, that calculation, who do we believe? It wasn't just about property lines. It was about the invisible lines drawn every day in America. Lines that tell us whose voice carries weight, whose story sounds credible, whose dignity gets brushed aside. But I wasn't going to let my silence build another wall around me. "Officer," I said, pointing to the car still sitting inside my yard, "look at where it is. Look at the skid marks straight through the stop sign, straight into my fence. My property line is clear. The city has the records." "His mistake, not mine," Karen huffed. "Don't listen to him. I know how this neighborhood is supposed to look." "His fence has always been an eyesore," her son added. "Yeah, man, just admit it. You should fix your fence better next time." But the officers walked closer. They traced the tire marks, measured the angle of the impact. One of them looked at me and nodded slowly. "He's right," the officer said. "Fence is within the line." This was driver error, and in that moment I felt something shift. For once, the truth stood taller than the lie. But Karen wasn't done. She tried pleading, bargaining, even raising her voice. "You can't tow his car, that's my son," she cried when they hooked it up to the truck. But the officers didn't flinch. They rode him up, called the tow, and just like that, her son's car was dragged down the street like a wounded beast. Neighbors who had been quiet started nodding to me. A few even clapped, not loud, not openly, but enough. Because they had seen it too, her reign of intimidation, her endless rules, her way of making you feel like a guest in your own home. That day, the wreckage of my fence became more than broken wood. It became a line in the sand. A reminder that silence is the soil where injustice grows. That when someone tries to twist the truth, you have to stand firm, even when your knees are shaking. And yet, as the tow truck disappeared and the crowd faded back into their homes, I couldn't shake the heaviness in my chest. This wasn't just about a fence or a car. It was about the constant battle of being forced to prove your worth, your truth, your dignity over and over again. Because here's the thing, the fence will be rebuilt. But the fight goes deeper. It lives in every glance that says you don't belong, in every accusation that shifts blame to you, in every attempt to silence your voice on your own land. That day wasn't just about me standing up to Karen or her son. It was about standing up for every time I'd been told to shrink, to bend, to carry the weight of someone else's mistake. It was about reminding myself and anyone watching that dignity isn't something anyone can hand you. It's something you claim even when the world tries to strip it away. And as I stood in my yard looking at the shattered pieces of wood, I realized sometimes the wreckage tells a bigger story than the thing that was destroyed. Sometimes the pieces on the ground remind you just how much strength it takes to stand. The next morning, the neighborhood felt different. Not quieter, not calmer, but charged as if the air itself knew a line had been drawn and the world had shifted slightly. Word traveled fast. Whispers, texts, and side glances carried the story further than I ever imagined. Karen, of course, wasn't taking it lightly. She fumed behind closed doors, her wrath simmering like a storm cloud waiting to burst. But I had learned something crucial, that Saturday, storms can reach you if you stand your ground. I spent that day assessing the damage. The fence was more than splintered wood, it was a symbol of my life here. I traced each crack, ran my hand along the jagged edges, and felt the absurdity of it all. One person's carelessness, amplified by privilege, had crossed a boundary that wasn't theirs to test. And yet, that boundary, my dignity, remained unbroken. By evening, the subtle tension in the street had thickened. Karen had taken her fury public, cornering neighbors one by one, weaving the story her way. In her version, I had somehow provoked her son. In her retelling, my fence was an obstacle course, a trap waiting for him to tumble. But the truth doesn't bend to gossip. The neighbors who had seen the wreckage knew better. The tow truck hadn't lied. The officers hadn't lied. Still, standing in my yard, I understood something I hadn't before. Some battles aren't just about right and wrong. They're about courage, the courage to speak when the world expects you to stay quiet, the courage to stand when the weight of intimidation presses down. The fence would be rebuilt, yes, but that physical repair was only a part of the story. I had to rebuild my sense of security in my own home too. I began calling contractors, gathering estimates, and documenting every detail. Each photograph, each receipt, each official report was a layer of armor against the next lie that might come. Then came the call that reminded me that justice has many forms. The insurance company needed a statement. I gave it, calmly, clearly, and without embellishment. My words were not just about wood and metal, they were about standing firm in truth. The agent listened, nodded, and promised support. And in that moment, I realized how rare and powerful it is to have institutions recognize your truth when the world around you tries to dismiss it. Karen, naturally, wasn't done. She began circulating letters to the HOA board, painting me as combative, difficult, and reckless. But she underestimated something fundamental, the strength that comes from a community that quietly watches, that knows when someone is being bullied and that values fairness over fear. Several neighbors reached out to me, offering support, not sympathy. Small gestures checking in, helping pick up debris, even sharing stories of their own confrontations with Karen formed a quiet network of resilience. One afternoon, as I sorted through debris, I heard laughter behind me. A young neighbor, barely more than a teen, was helping me lift a fence post. "You're like the hero in those old stories my grandma tells," he said, standing up for what's right. I smiled, the weight on my chest easing slightly. Sometimes justice on T about courts or finds it S about showing the next generation that truth has value, and courage is contagious. Weeks passed. The fence was rebuilt stronger, sturdier, a tangible testament to persistence. Karen's son eventually paid the fines for property damage, though he never admitted wrongdoing to me directly. And though Karen continued to try to manipulate perceptions, the truth had already settled into the cracks of the neighborhood like sunlight through a storm. People remembered which side of the story was real. But beyond fences, fines, and HOA politics, something deeper had shifted within me. I recognized that dignity isn't a gift. It's earned in moments where the world expects you to bow and you refuse. It's found when you confront lies with calm authority, when you show up for yourself even when no one else will, and when you refuse to be intimidated by someone who thinks position or power can rewrite reality. I started noticing the little victories everywhere. A nod from a neighbor who had been quiet before. A conversation with a friend who had been hesitant to confront similar situations. Even a passerby who commented on the sturdiness of my newly rebuilt fence. These weren't monumental, headline-grabbing wins, but they were reminders that truth and integrity ripple outward in ways you often don't see immediately. Yet, I also understood that battles like this aren't just about fences or HOA politics. They about the subtle structures of society that try to silence certain voices, to make people question their worth, their right to space, their right to be heard. Karen wasn't just a neighbor with a penchant for control. She represented the microcosm of a larger world where power and perception often outweigh fact. And confronting that, even in a seemingly small scenario, was exhausting, humbling, and necessary. In the weeks that followed, I began to reflect on the lessons embedded in the chaos. 1. The truth is not fragile. It survives slander, misrepresentation, and attempts at intimidation if you protect it diligently. 2. Standing up doesn't require anger. It requires clarity, patience, and unwavering commitment to your principles. And 3. Dignity is deeply personal. No HOA rule, no neighbor's opinion, and no car crash can diminish it unless you allow it. I also realized that what happened that Saturday went beyond personal vindication. It became a story, a marker, for anyone who has ever felt their voice dismissed, their reality questioned, or their worth minimized. It's about claiming space, speaking truth, and understanding that justice, though sometimes delayed, is amplified when you refuse to let fear dictate your actions. One evening, sitting on my porch, I looked at the new fence. Its posts stood like sentinels, straight and resilient, and for the first time, I felt a quiet sense of triumph. Not the triumph of defeating Karen or her son, but the triumph of knowing I had defended more than wood and nails. I had defended my right to exist with dignity on my own property, in my own neighborhood, on my own terms. The incident left scars, yes, but it also left something stronger, a reinforced sense of self, a renewed awareness of the importance of speaking truth, and a deeper understanding of the ways in which community, law, and personal integrity intersect. It reminded me that courage is not the absence of fear, it's seasoned to act despite it. In time, Karen's attempts to manipulate the neighborhood lost their potency. Her son, too, began to recognize that entitlement has limits. The fence remained, the truth endured, and I continued my life, a little wiser, a little stronger, and unshaken in the knowledge that dignity cannot be towed away, no matter how many cars crash into it. And so, every time I walk past that fence, I don't just see boards and nails, I see resilience, I see justice. I see a moment when one person refused to be silenced, refused to accept a lie, and refused to let fear dictate the boundaries of their life. That fence, once broken, now stands as a testament not to property, but to the enduring power of standing for what is right. Some mornings I still wake to a peaceful dawn, but now that peace carries a deeper resonance. It carries the weight of truth preserved, the quiet satisfaction of integrity maintained, and the knowledge that no matter who tries to rewrite your story, the truth, if held firmly, will always remain. And if Karen ever thought she could make me doubt that, she learned something crucial. No amount of intimidation can break a spirit fortified by justice, no lies can overwrite a clear conscience, and no car, no matter how recklessly driven, can crush the dignity that is rightly yours.